Okay, so this is a particular segment in the Supreme Court case hearing for affirmative action having to do with Asian Americans and their personal score being lower than any other ethnicity. Let's listen up.
There, because you referred to the personal score, and that's a score that Harvard gives based on character traits such as integrity, courage, kindness, and empathy. But the record shows that Asian student applicants get the lowest personal scores of any other group. What accounts for that? It has to.
My immediate thought is culture. I think we're thinking about how if you were born and raised in Asian American, that's the typical, I'd say Southern California, let's say like mid to upper socioeconomic background, the ones that will be trying and vying to apply for Harvard. I think a vast majority of them follow these like cookie cutter builds. You got to get good grades and test scores. Then you have to start a STEM for Youth club. And then you have to do all these things. And as a result, I've seen enough. I've almost 2 decades in this field. And I could tell you something that feels very generic right away versus something unique and genuine. And I'd say, excuse me, I'm about to go into meetings soon, so I got to be quick about this. But yeah, I think that the discrepancy that these lawyers and judges have, I could just cut straight through it and just tell you it's probably culture, but courage, the criteria for a personal score, integrity, courage, kindness, and empathy. To me, it's where do you get that evaluation from? And I think it's obviously going to come through teacher recommendations and through the essays, and that's where I have a whole channel dedicated to this, right? Like your essays got to have more EQ in them, and I think that is the crux of this discrepancy or this question about a personal score. But let's see what else we could find.
It could be one of two things. It has to be that they really do lack integrity, courage, kindness, and empathy to the same degree as students of other races, or there has to be something wrong with his personal score.
That is, I mean, I want to get to what the evidence was.
For the record, obviously, I do think that it doesn't matter what your race is when it comes to integrity, courage, kindness, and empathy. I'd argue that's more about culture, and that's more about socioeconomics and circumstance. But when he points to the alternative, right, there must be something wrong with the personal score. That's what I'm interested in. It comes down to how they evaluate the score, and they're going to get into that hopefully.
Was there, but that syllogism, with all due respect, is wrong. There was, for example, a study that was done in 1983 that looked at why it was that female applicants to graduate schoal at the University of...
No, just address this. The personal
Okay,
score that's given to Asian applicants to Harvard, why are they given a lower score than any other group?
Okay, so the answer to why they, as a group, why there is a slight numerical disparity with respect to the personal rating of Asian Americans, and also a slight numerical disparity to the advantage of Asian Americans with respect to the extracurricular rating and the academic rating, was the answer that their expert gave with respect to the latter two, which is that the only way that the only model that can be created to figure out what was going into the personal rating couldn't look at almost anything that admissions officers look at in those ratings. It can't, there's no way that it could model what the guidance counselor letters said, what the teacher letters said, what the essays said, what the interviewers' letters said. In other words,
I thought the interviewers did not rate the applicants lower than other applicants based on race. There was not the disparity in what was done by what was said by the interviewers.
With respect to the alumni interviewers, based on the subset that was included here, their subset, by the way, excluded all ALDC applicants. That is, even though they acknowledged that there was not only no evidence of discrimination against Asian American ALDCs, but they did better. They eliminated from their model applicants that represent, on average, 30% of the admitted class.
I still, putting aside the teacher recommendations or guidance counselor recommendations, which I'll come to, I still haven't heard any explanation for the disparity between the personal scores that are given to Asians. They rank below whites, they rank way below Hispanics, and really way below African Americans.
Okay, so real quick, there's a lot to uncover there. We're getting into the details now. So the personal score should incorporate things like what the teacher recommendations say, the interview letters, the interview, I guess, like notes or the interview assessment. Sorry, I'm lost for words there. And then the essays. So those are all EQ aspects to me: emotional intelligence, social intelligence, community intelligence. Again, I'm not surprised that Asians are going to have a statistically lower score when it comes to essays, extracurriculars that lean towards service and community. Even though I would argue that's really common now. I think I might exclude that and just stick with like essays and teacher recommendations and interviews. It's no surprise in a similar way that, at least for me, that their academic scores are much higher. So at least we know that when it comes to Asians, what will make or break your chances if your grades and test scores are there is whether or not your essays and teacher recommendations show that you're above the norm. Let's see, what else did I catch here? Something really interesting was ALDC. They were mentioning that. I had to look that up. That's legacy athletics. There's a 30% of student, like if you included ALDC Asian applicants, we're actually at an advantage in some ways, which was really interesting to me. It makes me think of all the smaller ways in which reducing affirmative action may actually be a detriment to Asian application chances overall. It also made me start thinking about how many of my students are athletes. Maybe we need to make like a number 2, number 3 activity, maybe give a little bit more value points to building towards a varsity sport. But yeah, let's continue.
And you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of applicants, maybe thousands. What is the explanation for that?
So the explanation that was, I can't do better than the findings of fact in the trial court as affirmed, but I want to make 2 points very clear with respect to your question. All of this was on display and in front of the trial court for this Asian American part of it for well more than a week, maybe 2 weeks. The district court found, considering all of the evidence, that there is, quote, no credible evidence that corroborates the improper discrimination suggested by SFFA's interpretation of the personal rating. Page 264.
I'll try one more time.
So the SFFA, Students for Fair Admissions, that's the group, the conglomerate of Asian American students and parents that came together to sue, which is why we're here. They, I think, were pointing mainly to the personal rating score as being kind of the smoking gun of discrimination. Let's keep reading or listening.
The district court found, quote, a statistically significant and negative relationship between Asian American identity and the personal rating assigned by Harvard admissions officers.
That's correct. And what she said is the record will not allow a full explanation of that because there was no evidence with respect to what teachers said, what guidance counselors said, what these students wrote about. But what we can say with respect to the allegation of discrimination in this case.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So right there, you got it. Our personal rating scores at Harvard, Asian American personal rating scores at Harvard, they know it looks bad because they see that there's that correlation of a lower score. But their defense to that is the score doesn't give the full holistic picture of essays, teacher recommendations. So back to point 1.
Which was the definition of discrimination that was at issue in Bakke and Grutter and Fisher, and which their lawyer got up at opening statement and said, when we talk about discrimination, in this case, we're talking about discrimination in admissions outcomes. And here again, The district court found, and the Court of Appeals also concluded, that there was no evidence of discrimination in admissions outcomes against Asian Americans. Whatever you think about the personal rating, which is, after all, simply a number
Justice Alito would like to ask a question.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to filibuster you.
Finish your sentence, then
Okay.
I will ask one more question.
I want to make one other thing clear to the extent that it's not clear from the record. The personal rating, like the academic rating and the extracurricular rating and the athletic rating, is a number that is put down by a, quote, first reader. That is, the file comes in, it's not usually complete.
Pre-reader.
And just as a matter of triage, one of the 40 admissions officers goes through and gives these numerical numbers. The testimony was, it is not considered in any way once the subcommittees and committees meet. It, quote, fades into the background. It is not the basis of admissions decisions. And so not only did the court find as fact that that slight disparity was not evidence of discrimination, even in the personal rating, it had no effect with respect to outcomes.
It makes no difference whatsoever? It doesn't
It's
affect
not that it makes no difference whatsoever. Look at what the expert testimony was, and I realize
Does it make a difference or doesn't it make a difference?
it doesn't make a statistical difference in admissions.
So lawyer, it doesn't make a statistical difference. Okay, that's interesting. It fades into the background once the subcommittees start to meet. Maybe it's like the smaller councils that really kind of narrow down students. It makes me wonder then how the lawyer here can stand there and make that statement. Perhaps the personal rating score it's a preliminary cutoff. And so it matters in the sense that if your personal rating score is too low, they won't then push you to the subcommittees for that, let's say, second round of evaluations. And in that second round of evaluations, the personal rating score becomes not that relevant. So maybe it's just a hard cutoff. I don't know. Interesting. It's kind of murky there.
And why do you do
Both courts
it? Why do you do it?
It
Doesn't matter. Why do you do it?
We do it as a matter of triage. Right now, Harvard last year got 61,000 applications for 1,600 slots. And it is an entirely rational way of figuring out how you were going to allocate your attention to ask an admissions officer as the file is being developed, just go through in a very rough way and rate a particular application based on what you can see on these 4 metrics.
Okay, so I think that confirms my thought there. Why do they do the personal rating score? It's because they got so many applicants and they have to have hard cutoffs so they can prioritize where they're going to actually spend time doing evaluations. This kind of harkens to another research angle that I've been pursuing about this topic, and it's that a lot of Asians, there's a higher percentage of Asians that will try or attempt to get into these top tier schools. I see this experience firsthand. I have a student who has like a 1300 and still wants to try to apply for Cornell for engineering. It is a completely dead on arrival option or plan unless you have some tags, some socioeconomic backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. So when you have a ton of Asians that are just trying to just go YOLO fishing, they're going to need to find a way to, as they say, conduct triage and figure out who they need to cut from the start. So I do think they use the personal rating score as kind of like an early preliminary cutoff, which means it does matter. Interesting.
The fact that Asian Americans got on average, a marginally lower personal rating score is no more evidence of discrimination against them than the fact that they got a marginally higher rating than any data can show on academics and extracurriculars. It doesn't mean that they're either smarter or people think they're smarter.
Thank you.
Okay, and that was it. So basically, I already knew all this. Asians are pretty good with AQ. Our culture, it's just about pushing for grades and test scores. There's a bilingual potential issue to this as well, where when you come home, the focus is on, did you get good grades and test scores? It's not, how do you think about the world news today? So the chance at home culturally for introspection, linguistically for introspection, maybe it's also an immigrant kind of thing as well. It's, you know, you that the focus is about working hard. Again, I'm not trying to cast any judgment. I'm simply saying that if you're trying to apply for Harvard, here's what you need to be aware of. You need to be aware that your AQ is not enough. They're going to delineate you based upon your EQ signal. So this is your personal score. I don't think it's about courage or blah, compassion. I do think those are elements that come out of a strongly built EQ applicant. For me, though, it just comes down to teacher recommendations and essays. Are you sociable? Do you have a sense of skepticism that's healthy and honest? Are you bright and optimistic, or are you just a number cruncher and a paper pusher? Because I, in my experience, I see a ton of Asians and Asian students and Asian parents that kind of create this type of a machine where it's just rote. It's not about the intellectual growth and the conscientiousness, the worldly, like attunement. It's about get the grades and then get the leadership, because that'll get you into college. And when it then comes to essays and teacher recommendations, you get called out for that. In fact, I posted a video earlier about a bad teacher recommendation, and I think that is what happens to a lot of Asians. And if you think you just have good grades and test scores and that's enough to get you in, and if you don't, and then you suddenly say foul play and call it racist, I think you got a little bit more soul searching to do. But that's me. That's my thought. I'm probably wrong about a couple things, but thanks for hearing me out until the end. And yeah, until next time. See ya, y'all.